I remember the day a shiny cream invitation with gold lettering arrived in my mailbox. It felt sophisticated, almost festive, and smelled of expensive perfume, the kind you save for special occasions. The envelope read in calligraphic script, "Catherine and Mark, we'd love to have you at our daughter Clara's baby shower." It was from Julia, my friend from college. She was always the type to make a big deal out of anything, from dinner on the patio to a picnic in the park. But this time, I guess, was her high point. Her first child, a new life, a new milestone. I smiled, holding the invitation in my fingers as if it were something fragile that could disappear with a breath. Then I handed it to Mark. "Julia's having a party, Clara's birthday. We need to be there," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. Mark looked up from his laptop, shrugged slightly. "Another party?" He took the invitation, glanced at it without reading it, and threw it on the coffee table. "We're going because you want to, right?" I nodded. The truth was a little more complicated. I wanted to go, but I also wanted him to want to go too. To ask, "What are we getting you?" Or say, "It would be nice to see Julia and the others." But instead, indifference. Getting ready for the party had become almost a ritual. I spent a long time choosing a dress. I settled on a navy blue one, slightly fitted, with open shoulders. Mark put on a shirt that probably still smelled of laundry detergent because it hadn't been worn once since it was bought. On the way, I looked out the window. The streets rushed past in the muted tones of the evening. Mark was silent, turning the steering wheel with one hand, pressing the phone to his ear with the other, discussing another project, as always. His voice sounded confident, authoritative. It always fascinated me once. Now, it just tired me. When we arrived, Julia's house was flooded with warm light. People were already standing on the veranda with glasses. Smiles, hugs, whispers. Inside it smelled of vanilla and champagne. Jazz was playing in the corner, quietly, unobtrusively. Julia came out to meet us with the baby in her arms. She looked charming in a pale pink dress, her hair tied in a careless bun. Her eyes were shining with pride and fatigue. "Oh my God, Catherine, you've come." She hugged me with one arm, pressing Clara to her chest with the other. "And Mark, I'm so glad." Mark smiled, his automatic, politically correct smile. "Congratulations," he said. "She's a miracle." I wanted to believe he was sincere, but his gaze was already wandering around the room, looking for a glass or a way out. We drank champagne, talked, congratulated each other. The men joked about sleepless nights. The women discussed pregnancy, lactation, and diapers. I sat between two worlds. The one where children are born, and the one where we haven't even decided whether we want such worlds at all. When Jack, Julia's friend, raised a toast to their new life, I felt Mark tense up next to me. He stood with his arms crossed, a half smile. When Jack asked, "And you, Catherine and Mark, when are you going to start a family of your own?" "With her?" Mark's voice was loud, even too loud for a room full of people. He laughed, sharp, with that metallic taste that leaves a hurt in your mouth. "I would rather have been childless than raise children with such negativity." The silence fell instantly. Julia blinked. Jack flinched. Someone snorted behind me. I felt my face burn. I silently set my glass down on the nearest surface. Everyone was looking at me. Some with sympathy, others with curiosity, still others with shock. And Mark stood there as if nothing had happened, already taking a sip from his glass. "Excuse me," I whispered and walked aside to the bathroom. The door closed behind me softly, like a coffin lid. I leaned against the sink, peering into the mirror. It didn't lie. There was a woman there, her eyes full of pain. And questions, no answers. Voices could be heard from the street, music filled the air again, but now it seemed distant, almost unreal. I took a deep breath, as if after a blow when my lungs don't know how to breathe again. In the glass of water that stood by the sink, a small rose petal floated, left by someone who, perhaps, was also looking for silence. I tried to pull myself together, to remember why we were still together. Love, comfort, fear of loneliness, or just habit, the kind that over the years becomes so dense that breaking it is like breathing without ribs. When I came out of the bathroom, Julia was waiting in the hallway. She was holding Clara on her shoulder, rocking her gently. Her eyes were wet. "Are you okay?" she whispered. Her voice was gentle, like the old days in the dorm when we talked about boys until midnight. I nodded, but a tear rolled down my cheek. Julia touched my hand. You don't have to put up with this, Cat. Never. You deserve more. The words cut into me like a blade. I nodded again, harder. I don't know if it was agreement or goodbye or just gratitude. After that, we left. No goodbyes, no words. Mark walked ahead, not looking back. I followed, silently counting the steps that separated me from myself. Mark and I drove home in almost complete silence. The car slid along the night road, only the soft hum of the engine filling the space between us. I looked out the window at the dark city and suddenly realized that I was afraid to speak. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I did. Every word that formed in my head was sharp as a shard of glass, and I didn't know where to start. When we pulled up to the house, Mark left without even waiting for me to grab my bag. The door slammed shut with a firm, determined thud. I sat there for a few more seconds, clutching the strap of my bag as if it were something to keep me afloat. Then I left. The apartment was quiet. Only the clock on the kitchen wall ticked steadily, each tick adding to the tension in the air. Mark threw his keys on the shelf by the entrance and went into the bedroom without even glancing in my direction. "Really?" I said, standing in the darkness of the hallway. "That's it?" He stopped in the bedroom doorway, turned, and propped his shoulder against the doorframe. "What exactly do you want, Catherine? For me to apologize for the truth?" "The truth?" I laughed, but my laugh was angry and hoarse. "You just said in front of everyone that I wasn't worthy of being a mother, that I was a negative. What was that if not humiliation?" He shrugged. "You always make a drama out of everything." "I was just joking." "Kidding?" I took a step forward. "Mark, it wasn't a joke. It was something so toxic that it made me question whether I even wanted to be with you anymore." His eyes narrowed. "Yeah, here we go. You again. You're always the victim, and I'm the monster." I went limp. It always was. When I expressed my pain, he would turn it around as if I were the source of the toxicity. As if my emotions were something excessive, uncomfortable, too loud. He was a master at making me question my reality. I walked silently to the bathroom, kicking off my shoes in the hallway, feeling the cold tile touch my heels. The mirror met my gaze again. This time, not with pain, but with something new. Maybe with fatigue. Maybe with the first hint of a solution. I slept in the guest room. Mark hadn't come, and he hadn't written anything in the morning. I woke up when the sun was already filtering through the blinds, drawing stripes on the ceiling. It was quiet. Too quiet. I got up, made coffee, and opened Julia's invitation again, as if it might provide the answer I was looking for. But it remained the same, elegant, silent, and powerless in the face of what had happened. After dinner, I called Julia. She answered almost immediately. "Hi," her voice was soft. "How are you?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I wanted to thank you for yesterday. And apologize. For him. For having to hear this." "Catherine," she interrupted me. "You're not the one to apologize. I knew it was not easy for you, but the way he behaved, I just don't understand how you can stand it." I was silent. "You know," she added, "I've always seen strength in you, even when you didn't notice it yourself. But sometimes, to save yourself, you have to leave instead of endure it." Her words hung in the air like a damp August evening, heavy but true. I put down the phone and sat on the kitchen floor for a long time. Mark wasn't home until the evening. I didn't ask where he was. He didn't explain. We ate dinner in silence, and this silence was no longer familiar. It was icy, like the last frontier. That night, I opened an old folder from university where I kept notes, essays, letters. Among them, I found a photo of Julia and I laughing on the steps of the dormitory. I recognized myself again. The same me who dreamed, who wasn't afraid, who believed that love was about support, not humiliation. The next day, Mark acted as if nothing had happened. He talked about work, read the news over breakfast, asked if I wanted to go to dinner with him on Friday. I looked at him like a stranger. There was no guilt in his voice. There was no remorse. Just the certainty that everything would stay the way it was. I nodded automatically, but inside everything was tightening. In the evening, I found an old suitcase in the closet. I began to pack my things, not with anger, but with a kind of crystal clarity. Everything, every pair of socks, every old sweater was a part of me that I no longer wanted to leave under his roof. Mark came back late. He saw the suitcase. "What is this?" he asked. "I'm going to Julia's For a few days. I need to think. Think about what? About how to ruin everything because you're too emotional? I looked at him straight. Think about why I let you devalue me for so long. And do I want it to continue? He said nothing. He just stood there, watching me zip up my jacket. I left the apartment and for the first time in a long time, felt like I was breathing deeply. And I knew. Part 2 of my story had just begun. The next morning, it started to rain. Not a downpour, but a quiet, monotonous rain that drips down the windows, as if trying to wash away everything that was left of yesterday. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that I didn't remember making. There was a thick silence in the air that neither the radio nor the noise of the street could break. Mark wasn't in the apartment. He must have left for work before I woke up. I didn't even feel like checking my phone. I sat motionless for a long time. In front of me lay a napkin on which was a dark imprint of the cup. For some reason, I looked at it, as if it were some kind of message. There was more honesty in this form, random and imperfect, than in all of Mark's words in the past year. The doorbell scared me. I jumped up, spilled some coffee on the table. She quickly wiped it off, then, not knowing what to expect, went to open it. Julia stood outside the door, in a raincoat, with an umbrella in her hands and with the same penetrating gaze. "Hello," she said simply. "I brought you something." She handed me a paper bag that smelled of cinnamon and pastries. "What is this?" I asked, still not believing she was here. "Cinnamon buns from the place where we always had breakfast after exams. Remember?" I nodded silently and let her into the apartment. She threw off her raincoat and carefully put the umbrella in the corner. We sat in the kitchen, silently unfolding the paper and dividing the buns in half, as if in some kind of ritual of return. "I couldn't help but come," Julia finally said. What he said, it was cruel. "It was true," I breathed, surprised at how calm it sounded. Maybe he always thought that. He just finally said it. "But he has no right to—" I raised my hand to stop her. "I know, but I guess I've let it go on too long. Now I don't know how to stop it." Julia leaned forward. "You know, you're just scared." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. She could see right through me. Always could. I clenched the napkin in my hands, felt my fingers tremble again. We were silent for a few minutes. Outside the window, the rain finally turned to a drizzle. "I found your picture," I whispered. "In the dorm. We're on the stairs. You're talking and I'm laughing. I look alive." Julia smiled. "You're still like that. It's just that someone inside you has been turning off the light for a long time. But it is there. I see it." The words melted something inside me. I felt a tear roll down my cheek. Then another, and another. I didn't try to hold them back anymore. "You're not alone, Catherine," she added, "and you never were. Even when you think all is lost, I'm here." I nodded through my tears. It wasn't salvation, but it was a start. We sat in silence for a few more minutes, letting the rolls cool. Julia turned to the window, as if she wanted to say something, but didn't dare. I noticed her lightly touch her earring, an old habit she did when she was nervous. "Has he called yet?" she asked quietly. "No," I said, "and I probably won't. He has other priorities. His work, his image, his idea of what a woman should be. And you don't fit into this picture?" Julia smiled bitterly. Maybe I never did. I just pretended for a long time that it suited me. My fingers slid along the edge of the cup. My voice trembled, but a new clarity began to emerge inside. Not anger or resentment, but some quiet certainty that things would never be the same again. And that this was a good thing. Julia stood up, walked over to me, and hugged me tightly. She didn't say any words of support, and she didn't need to. Her hug was exactly what I needed, a simple, human gesture without pretension. And in that moment, I knew I was not alone. I would never allow myself to be alone again with someone who had never tried to understand me. After she left, I was left alone in the kitchen with a half-empty cup of coffee and the warmth on my shoulder that Julia had left. I didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, this ignorance wasn't scary. There was something fresh about it, something real. After that morning with Julia, everything seemed to shift. The world hadn't changed, the same sky, the same streets, the same apartment. But something inside me had become different. I began to see details that I had previously lost in the fog of habit. How the leaves on the tree outside my window were turning yellow, how my neighbor would go out onto the balcony every day at 9:15 with a cup of tea. How, when I was left alone, I no longer felt relief, only silence. And this silence no longer hurt, but listened. In the evening, Mark came, as always, tired, silent, with the phone to his ear. He walked past me as if he were passing an empty chair. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't say a word about yesterday. He just got some water from the fridge, took a few sips, and went into the bedroom without taking off his jacket. I looked at him and felt that there was now not just distance between us, but an abyss. "Mark," I said finally. He stopped halfway, as if a wave had stopped his movement. He looked back slowly, with a look that had long since ceased to be the look of a lover. More like a colleague who can't remember the last meeting he saw you at. "What? Do you understand what you did yesterday?" He shrugged, threw his coat on a chair. "Are you talking about that again?" "Well, I'm sorry. That was inappropriate. A joke, probably." "It wasn't a joke. You wanted to humiliate me." He sighed, walked over to the kitchen table, and sat down opposite. "Okay, maybe that was rough. But you know how tiring it is. All this talk about kids, family, and pressure. I'm not ready for this. And I don't think you're the kind of person I can imagine doing this with." My heart sank, but not from pain, from confirmation. Everything I felt was now being voiced. He didn't believe in us. And maybe he never had. "Then why are we still together?" I asked quietly. He shrugged. "It just happened. Comfortable. We're settled. Shared plans, travel, careers." I wanted to bang the table, scream. But instead, I just stood up. "Comfort is not love, Mark. And I'm not going to be part of your convenient script where I'm relegated to the role of negative scenery." He raised an eyebrow. "You're exaggerating. You're always so emotional." "Maybe so, but it's better to be emotional than callous. Like you." I went into the bedroom, got out my suitcase. Every movement was clear, no doubt. Everything that had seemed complicated was now simple. I could no longer be a part of this calm collapse, this slow disappearance of myself. Mark stood silently in the doorway, watching me pack my things. His gaze was cold, almost analytical, like a broker who's lost a deal but is already looking for a new one. "And what's next?" he asked. "Next, me, without you." I left my keys on the nightstand. I left the apartment without looking back. The hallway smelled of detergent, the stairs of other people's dinners. I breathed in the air, unsterile, real. And for the first time, in a long time, I felt alive. Julia opened the door without saying a word, just hugged me. Her apartment smelled of the same cinnamon and lavender candles. I put my suitcase against the wall and collapsed on the sofa, like someone who had walked underwater for a long time and finally made it to shore. We were silent. The silence between us was not emptiness, but warmth. I knew that it would be difficult ahead, that not all days would be bright. But in this silence, there was a grain of hope, and the belief that I would still be able to build my life, real, honest, without roles and fear, and definitely without Mark. The first days after moving to Julia were like trying to breathe after a long dive. I woke up with the feeling that I didn't have to justify myself to anyone. Everything was different in the new apartment. Less space, more light. Julia made me a bed on the folding sofa, and she slept in her room, although every evening before going to bed, we still talked for a long time in the kitchen, drank tea, and just were. The first Sunday, we went to the farmer's market together. I held a basket of apples and pumpkins in my hands, listened to Julia argue with the seller for the best price for honey, and smiled. The smile was not born because it was necessary. It appeared on its own. The muscles of my face still had the memory of what it was like to be alive. When we returned, I made soup. Real vegetable soup without processed foods and canned goods. We ate in silence, the leaves rustling outside the window, and I suddenly felt, I don't miss Mark. I miss myself, the person I used to be. The second week, I found a job in a small cafe. It was temporary, not in my specialty, but I wanted to feel the rhythm. In the morning, I would wake up, put on my favorite sweater, and walk through the coolness and fog to the coffee shop, where the smell of coffee and new faces awaited me. People who knew nothing about me. People before whom I could be anyone. One evening, returning home, I saw on my phone an unmissed call from Mark. My heart sank, as it always does when you see a name from the past that has not yet been erased from your skin. I didn't call back, but I couldn't sleep for a long time that night. He wrote a day later, "I hope you're safe. I'd like to talk." I deleted the message without opening it. Maybe one day I would respond, not for his sake, but for my own. But now I knew that this conversation wouldn't change anything. and I didn't owe him any explanations. Julia's rehearsals for a new play began. She came in late, tired, but happy. I stayed home alone, leafing through old photos, sometimes crying. Not because of Mark, because of all the lost years, because of myself, whom I hadn't heard from for so long. I started writing. Short notes, fragments of scenes, dialogues, like a mosaic that would eventually form into something more. One evening, I went out onto the roof. From there, I could see the city, shimmering, imperfect, alive. I sat on an old blanket with a cup of warm milk and thought that maybe that was what it was all about. Life isn't about big decisions. It's about little things. Having a place to be, being heard by someone, not being ashamed of yourself. When a few weeks later, I met Alex, the guy from the bookstore next door, I wasn't looking for anything anymore. But he turned out to be a good listener. We first talked about literature, then about life, about fear and power, about shadow and light. He didn't ask why I tremble when someone speaks too loudly. He didn't ask why I stay silent when someone jokes about family. He was just there. I don't know what will happen to Alex. I don't know what will happen tomorrow. But I know that today I woke up and didn't feel a heaviness in my chest. That a customer in the cafe told me that I had a beautiful smile. That I sent a short text to a literary competition. That I learned again not to be afraid of the future. When I meet acquaintances from the past, some from the party, even those who witnessed Mark's laughter, I no longer hide my eyes. Now I know that that evening was not the end, but the beginning. And although this road is unknown, I am finally walking it alone. Alone, but not alone. Sometimes you have to break down to rebuild yourself. Sometimes you have to lose someone to get yourself back. I don't regret leaving. I only regret staying so long. But now I'm here. And for once, that's enough.